Yes, guys, welcome to Freedom 2030. I'm very excited to be sharing this with you. And by the end of this short video, you'll understand what Agenda 2030 is, why independence from the system is the key to preparing for it, the three pillars that are essential for building independence, the Freedom 2030 vision itself, and also, most importantly, how you can be a part of it. And to be clear, guys, this is worldwide. This isn't just for the UK. Agenda 2030 is a worldwide agenda, and Freedom 2030 is a worldwide vision and mission. The specifics may look different depending on where you live, but the principles we'll be covering today apply anywhere in the world. So whether you are watching this from the UK, the US, Australia, Asia, Europe, or anywhere else, it doesn't really matter, guys. There is a place for you within the Freedom 2030 vision, and this presentation will help you understand what exactly that is. Before we dive in, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Billy, and during COVID, like many people, I saw the globalists manufacture world events to further their agenda, and amongst other things, empty supermarket shelves and the thought of not being able to feed my family made me realize that we simply cannot be dependent on a system controlled by people that wish to manipulate and coerce us for their own evil ends. And that realization led me to sell our home, sell our business, and completely change the direction of our lives. And since then, we've built a 100% off-grid community farm. We now have over 60 families as part of our farm community. And outside of that, we've helped thousands of people take practical steps towards independence from the system through land and community. And what I'm going to share with you today came through 5 years of trying to answer one very simple question. How do we build real independence from the mainstream system? But before I share my answer to that question, let's talk about Agenda 2030, because understanding the problem is what helps us understand why we actually need independence from the system in the first place. So what is Agenda 2030? I'm not going to go really deep into the agenda here, guys. I'm sure if you're watching this, you're already aware of it to some degree, but I will summarize it briefly as I see it. So Agenda 2030 is part of a much larger plan being implemented by what I call the globalists. And the plan involves creating centralized digital infrastructure that tracks almost every aspect of our lives, restricting our behaviors and actions to those deemed acceptable by the state. And it includes things like digital identities and central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDCs. It involves the majority of the world's population living in smart cities, with AI surveillance systems tracking people through biometric data. And all of this combined with some form of social credit system where your behavior determines what you can and can't do. Carbon tracking will likely be a key feature as well, used to justify restrictions on travel and limits on things like meat consumption. And the result of all this is a world where our freedoms become extremely limited, or in a worst case scenario, completely non-existent. What you can do, where you can go, what you can say, what you can eat, all monitored and restricted according to centrally determined criteria. Will it unfold exactly like this? Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter whether every detail unfolds exactly like I've laid out. What does matter though is that if this becomes a reality in any form, we are in serious trouble, which is a polite way of saying, guys, we'd basically be fucked. So what can we do? The most common strategy I hear in response to the agenda is something to the effect of, well, I just won't comply. And as much as I respect and support that perspective, I'm going to explain why I believe that if you don't prepare, you will find yourself with no choice but to comply. Conditional access. So as much as I support non-compliance in principle, in practice, if you don't prepare for what's coming, it just doesn't work, and I'll explain why. We are entering into a new era, guys. With the digital centralized system that's being built, the powers that be no longer need to use physical force to achieve compliance. Instead, they can use something that's actually far more effective, and this is what I call conditional access, okay? So this is compliance via exclusion. If you want access to the system, you must do X, Y, Z. If you don't comply with XYZ, you lose access. And we saw early prototypes of this strategy during COVID, guys. No jab, no job, no mask, no entry, no test, no travel. And I believe the entire system is moving in this direction of conditional access. And in the near future, it will become no digital ID, no access to the food system, no CBDC wallet, no ability to transact financially. Basically, no compliance, no participation in daily life. So they won't need to physically force your compliance. They'll simply restrict your access to the system until compliance becomes the voluntary option. And let's use a simple example, guys, to demonstrate this. Let's say someone is saying, I'll never accept a digital ID. And the intention to refuse a digital ID is sincere. However, if supermarkets, for example, require digital ID to access food and you have no alternative option in place, the principle, I won't comply, becomes the practice practical reality, my children need to eat. And in this scenario, your principles become overwhelmed by the reality of survival. Dependency creates control. And this is the real problem, right? We are dependent on the mainstream system for our survival, our water, our energy, our food, and our essential daily necessities. And whenever somebody else controls access to the things you need to survive, they also have the ability to control your behavior. And they can reward compliance, and also they can punish non-compliance via exclusion. And this leads us to a very simple and obvious truth. Dependency creates control. The more dependent we are on the mainstream system, the less freedom we have. However, there is some good news. The opposite is also true. The less dependent we are on the mainstream system, the more freedom we have. So independence creates freedom. Therefore, if we can secure the essentials of life like water, energy, and food independently of the mainstream system, then those essentials can no longer be used to manipulate our behavior and force our compliance, which means that we can disagree with Agenda 2030 in principle and we can back it up in practice. Therefore, the question that we all need to be asking ourselves is not how do we fight the system, but rather how do we create independence from it? Unfortunately for you, I've already spent the last 5 years trying to answer that exact question, and I'm going to share my conclusions with you now, guys. The 3 pillars of independence. So we've now covered that if you want to have resilience from Agenda 2030, then you must have independence from the mainstream system. And I've already been on a long journey trying to build this independence, and my conclusion is that it has 3 interconnected parts: land, community, and network. And this is what I call the 3 pillars of independence. And here's how it works, guys. Number 1 is land. So everything starts with land, because access to land gives you the opportunity to reduce your dependence on the mainstream system by creating water, energy, and food security. And without access to land, it's impossible to really build the practical foundations needed for independence. And then number 2 is community. So land alone won't and can't give you freedom. No individual or family can learn, know, build, grow, and do everything, which is why you need community. Community allows you to share skills, knowledge, labor, and resources with others, and it unlocks the potential of the land so that you can strengthen your independence from the system. And then number 3 is network. So even strong land-based communities remain vulnerable in isolation. We are facing a worldwide agenda, and a worldwide agenda needs a worldwide solution. So a strong community protects the individuals, but a strong network protects the communities. So by connecting freedom-focused land-based communities together, we build a decentralized movement capable of creating independence from the system at scale. So in summary, independence begins with land, is strengthened through community, and becomes resilient through a network. And together, these 3 pillars create a real path to living with freedom, both now and in the future. And it's a future where you have food, water, and energy security, a future where you are surrounded by like-minded people who support you, and ultimately a future where you have more freedom, more choices, and greater control over how you and your family live. And it took me a long time to arrive at this approach, guys. I know I've just summarized it very briefly, but this was all discovered through real world, hard-earned lessons, mistakes, and experiences I had while trying to build independence for my own family. And I think the best way I can help you understand what the 3 pillars actually are, how they work, and why you need them is to simply share that journey. So I'm going to go now into the story of how I set out to build independence from the mainstream system, and that all began with land. So pillar number 1, guys, land. The COVID scamdemic made something unmistakably clear to me. The elite control the system, and they can manipulate it to advance their agenda. And during COVID specifically, we saw them utilize conditional access. Like we've already covered, this was no jab, no job, no mask, no entry, no test, no travel. And although these policies didn't impact me much personally because I wasn't employed and I simply didn't wear a mask, that wasn't the point. The point was the principle behind it. We were given a glimpse of a very dark future, a world where under a centralized digital system, your access to the essentials of life becomes entirely conditional on being a good citizen. And as we all saw during COVID, being a good citizen has absolutely nothing to do with actually being good and everything to do with compliance. So COVID made me realize that if your food, water, energy, money, etc. all depends on the mainstream system, then the system and the people who run it hold ultimate power over your life. And that was the point where it really clicked for me. If we want to be able to live with freedom, we have to remove the system's leverage over the essentials of life. At first, I tried to accomplish this at home while still living in London. So I started collecting spring water, growing my own veg, keeping chickens for eggs. And as great as this was, I very quickly realized that there was no way I would be able to build any real independence at that scale. And this was the realization of the first pillar of independence: land. If I had access to land, I would be able to secure the essentials of life independently of the mainstream system. And once I fully understood this, I made accessing land my mission. So I sold my home, sold my business, and set off to build the self-sufficient homestead that would give my family the independence I sought, or at least that was what I thought at the time. Which leads us into pillar number 2, guys: community. So after having my realization about independence from the system and the need for land, I set out to build my agenda-proof self-sufficient homestead. And after a spell volunteering, I created the opportunity to rent 5 acres and a 3-bedroom house on a working beef farm. We were super excited. We thought we could learn, know, build, grow, and do everything ourselves. Just me, my wife, the kids, and a really beautiful dream of freedom. We gave it everything we had, but reality hit pretty fast and we became completely overwhelmed, because becoming self-sufficient isn't just a lot of work, it's actually an impossible amount of work. No individual or family can do everything. But after we sold up, there we were trying to do exactly that. And even if we were successful, even if we did manage to create independence from the system through self-sufficiency, instead of being slaves to the system, we'd just end up being slaves to our own system, working like dogs 7 days a week. And if anything went wrong, an injury or an illness, the whole thing would just collapse overnight. And the homesteading dream felt very different from the homesteading reality. And we slowly came to an unexpected but ultimately liberating realization that true independence from the system needs people. We need people with skills, knowledge, and time, people who see what's happening in the world and want to be a part of building the solution together. And this is the second pillar of independence, guys: community. And it's why we gave up on homesteading and shifted our strategy from self-sufficiency to community sufficiency. It's also why we built our 100% off-grid farm as a community farm. It's why we have a core team of 5 families running our project, as well as an extended supporting community of over 60 families. Basically, guys, we share the load, right? And the beautiful thing about this model is that everyone can play a role and everyone can benefit. Some people contribute labor, some people contribute skills and knowledge, some people become members, some people invest, some become part of the core team, some support the project by buying food. But basically, everyone is contributing in different forms. Everyone is supporting the project in a way that suits their situation. And most importantly, we all get the independence from the mainstream system that we need. So at this point, we had our completely off-grid farm, we had the land, we had the community, and we were hoping that it was mission accomplished. But even after building this amazing farm and achieving the level of freedom and independence that we'd once only dreamed of, and this leads me on to pillar number 3, guys: network. So even after everything we'd built, the land, the water security, the off-grid energy, the food systems, the community on the farm, it still felt like something was missing. We had achieved independence from the system. We had a level of freedom most people could only dream of, but there was a problem. Our freedom was fragile, because even strong land-based communities are still vulnerable to Agenda 2030 in isolation. If things continue as they are unchecked, if the centralized control tightens, if the financial system collapses, if digital enforcement becomes universal, a single farm cannot resist it, a single community cannot slow it down, and it doesn't matter how independent any one farm or one community is, no project can survive alone. We are facing a worldwide agenda, and a worldwide agenda needs a worldwide solution. And after realizing this and actually having the platform to be able to do something about it, our mission expanded. We now understood that for our collective long-term freedom, we needed thousands of farms and millions of awake people, tens of millions of acres of decentralized food production, and a mass movement of independent communities, all connected together in a worldwide network. And this was the missing piece of the puzzle, right? Because a strong community protects the individuals, but a strong network protects the communities. And that realization led to the third pillar: network. And this is exactly why we built the Wild Minds Network, to empower people around the world to create real independence and freedom at scale in a connected worldwide network. And we want to build a movement large enough, resilient enough, and decentralized enough to literally tip the scales of the future back into the hands of the people. And this is the Freedom 2030 vision, guys, all right? That all awake people, and that includes you watching this, will have reclaimed your independence from the mainstream system by 2030. You will have land, you will have a strong, like minded community, and your community will be protected inside a worldwide decentralized network consisting of thousands of freedom focused communities. And the amazing thing is, guys, that when you achieve this, it is a true win-win. It is not a sacrifice for the collective, and it's not selfish individualism either. By strengthening ourselves, we strengthen our communities. By strengthening our communities, we strengthen the wider network. And by strengthening the wider network, we create a future where freedom itself becomes possible. And I want to be 100% clear here, guys. I'm definitely not saying that you need to recreate my specific journey, but everyone, and I really do mean everyone, has a role to play in Freedom 2030. And you don't need to have everything figured out before you begin. You don't need years of experience, and you don't need massive amounts of money. You simply need to be willing to play your part. And what's far more important than how you start, guys, is really simply that you start at all. That's the Freedom 2030 vision, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd also love to know where exactly you are right now on your own journey. You can drop a comment, guys, on this video, and I will be in there responding myself personally.